Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to another installment of the Diaspora Project podcast. My name's Abby and I'm going to be your host for this episode. Now, today we had the privilege of sitting down with Claudia, who is an up-and-coming writer who has actually just written her debut novel. This novel is called A Letter Away from Asaba, and it's an epistolary novella, which basically means it's a book made up of letters and diary entries that centers on the events of the Nigerian Civil War, but specifically on an event that was suppressed, and the story of the event was kind of erased from history effectively. This event was called the Asaba Massacre. Now, this book centers two characters in 1967 and focuses on the theme of the erasure of history, the suppression of different narratives, and looks at the diaspora experience and parallels that with what's happening with the Nigerian Civil War. Now, this episode, we sat down with Claudia, spoke about her history as a writer, her journey through writing this book, why she chose to write this book as a historical fiction, why choose this specific historical event, her experience of navigating publishing as a young Black woman who's an independent writer, and finally focused on the diaspora experience and what that meant to her. I really enjoyed talking to Claudia. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode. Awesome stuff. So I have the immense privilege of being here with yourself. Claudia, what is up? How are you doing? How is life?
Hi, Abigail. Yeah, I'm good. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here on this podcast. I'm very excited for this conversation. I'm just ready to really dig in. But yeah, no, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing really good. Um, you know when old people are talking to each other and they're trying to make small talk and they're like, "Oh, the weather, the weather." But legit, the
Yeah,
weather.
I
Like,
know
I
exactly
mean,
what you mean.
I don't know what's happening where I'm at right now, but the weather has just been a bit crazy. It's like deciding to be like, it's like we've got summer on
Yeah,
Monday and then like autumn and what by Thursday, Friday, and
exactly.
then
It's very up and down. Like I'm looking out of my window right now and it's calm, windy, but like it could be
mm,
raining in 30 minutes.
you
You
understand
just
what I
never know.
mean? I'm just
Yeah.
like, oh, child. It's like temperamental, like you know when you're cooking rice and then you never know if the rice will rise the way you want it to rise. You know when you make
That's
if I
that's a perfect way of describing it. Like
yeah,
now that I think about it.
I'll be like,
Yeah.
is the weather rising today? And you're like, nah, it's overcooked. And I'll be like, everyone else will be
Uh,
like, what the heck is going on?
or it's
So yeah,
undercooked. You never know.
yo, yo, you know when you go to a party, you get crunchy rice. Have you been to those
Yeah,
ones? And you're just like,
yeah,
bro.
definitely. Or the soggy rice. Like it's just there's so many different types of rice. Like
mm, it should be its own field of study. Riceology, riceologist.
I think you're onto something
I am.
there.
Forget this whole uni thing. Let me just go and become a
Yeah.
riceologist. No, so I am joined by yourself, Claudia, and it is a real privilege to be talking to you, and I'm really excited for this
Thank
conversation.
you.
For those of the people who are listening right now and they don't really know who you are, what you do. Who is Claudia? Who are you? What do you do? What's the
Yeah.
story?
Yeah, so I'm the author of A Letter Away from Asaba. It's a historical fiction that was published in March 2023, so
Let's
newly published
go.
author. I'm also based in Scotland, based in Edinburgh. I study history and politics at the University of Edinburgh. And yeah, that's a bit about me. I'm just someone who loves creativity. I even have hyper creative babe in my Instagram bio because
I saw
I
that
think
and I
that
thought that was cool.
perfectly defines me. Like even though I study something as academic as history and politics, I still love engaging in those subjects creatively. Like I love writing, I love reading, I love listening to music. Yeah, so that's what makes
Mm,
me
I love
essentially.
it. No, no, no. Get me back to civilization. Tell us a bit about the book. So tell us what is the story of your book? What is your book about? What's the story there?
So my book is a historical fiction, like I mentioned, and it zooms in on a particular event that happened during the Nigerian Civil War, known as the Asaba Massacre. And Asaba is a town in Nigeria. It's located in Delta State, which is in the South region. And yes, during the Nigerian Civil War, there was a massacre there. I'll go into the history a little bit. I won't, because I feel like some context is needed in order to kind of like contextualize everything. But yeah, so essentially the Nigerian Civil War, you had the state of Biafra, which is in the southeast region. They had declared themselves a new state and yeah, a secessionist state. And so the rest of Nigeria obviously weren't fond of that, particularly those in the north. And so the federal troops essentially declared war on Biafra. And so the federal troops are fighting to unite Nigeria, and the Biafrans are fighting to have their own state in the southeast region. And yeah, so you had the federal troops against the Biafran troops. There were a lot of battles going on at the time. This was in 1967, it started. And yeah, so the Biafrans had made quite a good advance in the beginning. They invaded the Midwest region, they took places like Benin City, but then the federal troops pushed back. And what's interesting about Asaba is Asaba is located by the Niger River, which is right next to Biafra. So Asaba was not considered part of Biafra, but it was right next to the river between Onitsha and Asaba. So that bridge and that river was very strategic and very important for both sides because essentially if the federal troops cross that bridge, they're entering Biafran territory, and if the Biafrans cross that bridge, they're entering Nigerian territory. And yes, what had happened is the Biafrans were doing well, they made an advance, but then the federal troops started to push them back, so they went back into Biafra, and they knew that that bridge was important. If the federal troops cross that bridge, they're now, entering Biafran territory. And so what they did was they blew up parts of that bridge, the Biafran troops, leaving the federal troops kind of in the Asaba region and not able to cross, which is what they desperately wanted to do. And so the federal troops are believed to have entered Asaba on the 5th of August. On the 5th of October, 1967. And yeah, and obviously these troops were frustrated and yeah, there was a lot of poor behavior at the hands of the army, which I go into in the book. And so in Asaba, they committed a lot of atrocities. They looted homes. They killed a lot of people, particularly young men. And yeah, there was a lot of rape as well. So yeah, essentially, yeah, a lot of atrocities were committed.
Yeah,
in
that's
Asaba.
traumatizing.
Yeah, a lot of trauma, and that's what essentially became known as the Asaba Massacre. And this is something that has been researched historically, but not enough at all. It's something that was censored both in Nigeria, but particularly in Britain at the time, because Britain was supporting the federal troops and they wanted Nigeria to be united. It was economically advantageous. Very interesting. And so for that reason, for them to highlight the poor, almost poor behavior and inhumanity of the federal troops, it wouldn't look good on their part either. And so they made an active effort to kind of censor this information. And yeah, I've gone into a lot of the historical part.
No, but it's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and I think so what my book essentially tackles is the Asaba Massacre and the censorship that came with it. And there's two protagonists in the book, Onome and Choma. They're best friends, both Nigerian women. Onome lives in London. She's studying there at the time. And Choma lives in Asaba, experiences the massacre, and is very lucky to have survived. And the word letter in A Letter Away from Asaba is essentially the fact that it's an epistolary novella. It's a novella that consists of only letters and diary entries that alternate. And these two girls are sending letters to each other so Choma's telling Onome about what's going on in Asaba, and Onome's telling her about, her life living as part of the diaspora in 1960s Britain. And so Choma's telling her this and that is happening in Asaba, and Onome's reading the news, and it's something entirely different. What's in the news is essentially a false narrative about what's really going on. And I think, yeah, so the letters are powerful in that sense because they're really depicting this sense of censorship and this diasporic experience of just, yeah,
Mm.
confronting false narratives all the time about where you're really from. And this
Yeah, that's
into
huge.
their friendship as well, because there's times where Onoma is telling Choma, "Oh, but are you sure that happened?" They're saying this happened.
Mm.
Choma's
Mm-hmm.
like almost like, "How dare you say this?" Because I'm literally here living the experience. So yeah, that's essentially what it's about. And the
That
series
is
of
deep.
diary entries and letters of these two young women, they're attempting to come to grips with the massacre. They're attempting to unpiece everything and really understand what's going on, and also fulfill their desire of publicizing its existence in opposition to the censorship. And this isn't easy. They face a lot of hurdles along the way, because yeah, the goal of many is to ensure that the victims die in vain and that they're not remembered and that people can just move on with their lives swiftly and
Jeez.
not remember this massacre, but the trauma still haunts the town even till today.
Wow.
So yeah,
Wow. That is I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be aware of, some of the events of the Nigerian Civil War and the history behind that, but that is heavy. I mean, I especially what you were saying about like the somebody telling you one thing, but then you see on the news something completely different. Like that is like you're saying, that is an experience I think a lot of people can relate to, especially people from a lot of different places in the world, but specifically for Black people, African people being fed one narrative but actually experiencing another.
yeah,
And what do you and you, I mean, the censorship of history. What the heck is that about? What
yeah.
what made you what made you tell this story? I mean, obviously you're saying this is a story that's been censored. It's been, it hasn't really been given justice. But what made you, Claudia, write this particular story of all the stories to tell?
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting because I actually, well, I was born in London, raised in Northwest London for the first 12 years of my life, and then I moved to Sweden. And whilst I was in Sweden, I was doing the International Baccalaureate program. For those of you who are unaware, it's an alternative to Scottish Highers and A levels. And I was required to write an extended essay towards the end of the program, right before I came to university. And I'd read a book called The Asaba Massacre, Trauma, Memory, and the Nigerian Civil War. I just spontaneously ordered it because I don't know. I studied history during IB, and a lot of the history I was doing was focused on Europe and America. Um, there wasn't any sort of discussion or focus on the history of Africa and its diaspora.
Hmm.
That was it was really just filtered out, almost like it didn't exist. And so I was craving that information. I wanted to look into the history of my ethnic background. And so I
Mm.
randomly ordered that book from the library. It came and I started reading it, and I was just shocked by what I was reading. I was reading so many things that I'd never heard before. I spoke to family members, and they were also like, wow, like we didn't know about this information. And that's what got me thinking that there is like a serious level of censorship within the study of history itself. And I really wanted to explore an area that I'm one passionate about, that I can identify with. And so I chose to write my essay on the British censorship of the Asaba massacre. And yeah, so that's what really got me into writing, wanting to
Yeah.
write a book about that, because at the end of the day, there's so many events that have been censored. The Asaba massacre is just one of many, right? But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think because of that personal experience that I had with reading about it, writing an essay on it. I had to do a lot of intense research. And so it never really left my mind, even after I had graduated from IB and was starting university. It was always at the back of my mind when I was learning about um, just, your usual history that, prioritizes um,
World War One, World War
the white
Two,
man.
Cold
Yeah,
War,
World War
Cold
One.
War.
It's
Rise of the
so
Nazis. That's all you ever do in history. Like it's so textbook, man.
Yeah, because that's literally what I did in IB. Like the rise of the Nazis, I could tell you, I could go into heavy facts about that, like the death
Mm,
toll, the different battles, and like it was baffling me how I knew this much information. And don't get me wrong, that is still important history, but me being a black person from Nigeria, I was just questioning like why I'd never learned about that. And so yeah, so writing the book was essentially trying to tackle that, trying to bring this event to light, and also at the same time, it was a way for me to explore an area of history that I enjoyed learning about, and it was also a way for me to write fiction that in hopes of people reading it and also learning about it as well, because I didn't want it to stop with me. I didn't want because I had learned about it, but then I wanted other people to learn about it. I didn't want
yeah,
um,
yeah.
to be like gatekeeping this information because
Mm,
um, yeah, it was an important event, a tragic event, and it's
yeah,
something that should be commemorated, something that should be remembered and
absolutely.
not erased.
Yeah. And this is what I find interesting, like you said, Claudia. It's like we as black people have a huge issue because we don't have direct access to our history in that way. So I don't know how you felt when you read that book, but I remember there was a period of time where I was starting to engage myself in history, Ghanaian history, the history of my family's tribe specifically, and I was shocked because I mean obviously I grew up in Scotland and it's the same thing, Scottish farming, World War I, World War II, whatever. But it baffled me because like you're saying, even with the characters in your book, that juxtaposition, we're
Hmm.
fed one narrative about who we are, about what happened to us.
Hmm.
But the reality is so
Yeah.
different. And it's jarring sometimes because you're like, whoa, I never realized this is who we are as a people. I never realized this is what happened to us as a people. Um, Especially when you're talking about British censorship, I can't lie to you, that does not surprise me. Yeah, it's what's that expression that they use that history is written from the position of the victor?
Yeah.
And
That's
is
that's
that
a
what you
fact.
found as well?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think another thing about like African history generally, I think we pass down a lot of information historically orally.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think even in the study of history itself, oral history is always looked down upon. It's seen as um, opinionated. It's not really seen as facts, whereas written history is upheld as, oh, this is the truth. And so I think we also have that issue of not having a lot of written evidence of what happened. And then on top of that, colonization and the suppression of
Mm-hmm.
all of these narratives. So I think, yeah, there's been so many different hurdles. And yeah, the information has just been, yeah,
I find that
severely
point
censored.
so I find that point so weird. We were saying about like, oh, oral history is looked down upon, but written history is. Doesn't matter whether it's coming from your mouth or your hand. A lie is a
Right,
lie. A lie
right.
is a lie. Like you can lie, you can write
Mhm.
20 pages of, you get me? Like
Exactly.
doesn't necessarily make it true.
Yeah. And sorry to take it back to Nazi Germany, but I studied so much of it in IB. And I remember we would analyze like propaganda posters and propaganda letters and things like that written by the Nazis. So are you going to tell me that's true? Because it's like um, there's propaganda as well. So whether or not something's written or oral, I think, and to give historians credit, we are now starting to value oral history, but it's taken this long because
Mm,
I don't know. There's just been such a stigma against it. But I'm glad that now we're opening our eyes and our vision to oral history because oral history is so important for people who didn't have power at that time. Because a lot of people, for example, people who weren't educated to write, that's the only way you're going to get key information from those people. So
mm,
written history and only looking at written history is erasing so many people in
mm-hmm,
itself from the
mm-hmm.
discussion. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. That's interesting. I mean, this is something that this is a huge strategy of when the colonialists came. One of the huge strategies they used was to kill the historians. If you kill the people that hold your history, those key people. I mean, every tribe, every nation, every people group will have different ways of passing down that oral history. But if you kill those people, your history is gone. Is
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that people did. They came and they were like, if we take out strategic people and communities,
Hmm.
we take out the elders and we take out the people who have witnessed the truth, then we can kind of, like you're
Hmm.
saying, rewrite our own narrative. Hey, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to drop in to ask you guys to like, follow, and share this podcast. If you like this podcast, give us a rating on Spotify or Google or wherever you're listening to us on, and let us know what you want to hear more of in the coming episodes. All right, back to this one. So with this specific story, this specific massacre, you wrote this book as fiction. Not like
Hmm.
not because the event was fictional, but you chose to write it about two fictional characters and have that relationship with one being in London and one being in Asaba. What what did you gain as a writer from being able to write fictionally about this massacre?
I think, yeah, I gained a lot. I think my reason, first of all, for choosing fiction is varied. I think I've always loved reading books. I've always loved creative writing from a young age. And so, yeah, it was almost like a no-brainer for me to combine those two passions of mine, my passion for history, history as in the study of history, but also my passion for creative writing and just expressing myself. Combining the two together was so important for me. And I think also being an undergraduate student, I don't think I felt ready to write a nonfiction book on that kind of subject. I would need, access to archives and to be able to speak to people as well who lived through that. And at the moment, I don't have that access. So I think even if I
Mm-hmm.
was to write a nonfiction, it would be a lot later down the line for me, career-wise. But yeah, when it comes to historical fiction, that's one of my favorite genres in terms of books because I've always been able to learn so much, but to learn it in a creative way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, so I read a lot of Chimamanda's books. I remember Half of a Yellow Sun. That's actually what introduced me to the Nigerian Civil War, and
Mm,
so I knew early on like the power of historical fiction, the fact that it can bring together so many people, just book lovers or people who just enjoy reading in general, and they can read books like that and learn from it as well. Because I think, I mean, I do have my days where I sit and read a romance novel and get into a delusional.
mm-hmm,
um, I do that, but then most of the time when I read, I do like learning something in some way.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And yeah, so being introduced to an aspect of history and then being equipped to then do more research about it. Yeah, so I think that's the beauty with historical fiction. And actually, the day I decided to write this book, I had listened to a TED talk by Funa Maduka, and she's a film director, a Nigerian American film director. And what she was saying, she was talking about the film industry, but I kind of related it to the book industry. And she was talking about how we need more focus on African narratives within film.
Mm-hmm.
And she
Absolutely.
talked about, yeah, she talked about watching Queen Elizabeth when she was doing her history undergraduate years ago, and how that um, helped her learn more about the British monarchy.
Mm-hmm.
But she was like, why isn't there any of this when it comes to African narratives? And I think because not everyone's gonna love history, as sad as it is for me, because I love history, but I know I have to be honest with myself and know that like not everyone is interested in the study of it. But I think history has such a culture that it can be presented in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think it can definitely permeate within the creative fields, and that's something I'm hopeful for. And I think A Letter Away from Asaba is only a start to this, but
Yeah,
um,
that's very, very
yeah,
cool. I mean, like you're saying about history, I mean, Oppenheimer, at the time of recording, the film Oppenheimer just came out and netted how many hundreds
mm,
of millions? That's a that's
right,
a that's a story about history. Like the thing is,
yeah.
and not to dovetail away from African history because we're coming right back, but the thing I
Mm-hmm.
love about did you do Barbenheimer? I love that so
No,
much.
I'm actually
Barbenheimer.
supposed to. I'm actually supposed to watch Barbie tonight. So no
Oh man.
spoilers.
Yeah.
Have
Shout
you
out to
watched
those who
both?
made Barbie.
You have
Oh
watched
yeah, I
both,
did
right?
both of them. I watched them
Yeah.
both in the opening weekend. Really, really good. Really good. But with Oppenheimer, for those, I mean, if you haven't seen it by the time this has come out, I'm so sorry. But just without any spoilers, it's they're telling a story about something that happened in history. Okay, cool, whatever. But the stylistic way they were able to do that, it 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 humanized the characters and it humanized the history. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Mm-hmm.
Like it stops
Yeah.
becoming an event on a page and it starts becoming real people in real places doing real things. And that's essential because when you're able to engage with history in that way, it comes to life. And the same with
Exactly.
I don't know if you went to see The Woman King.
No.
The
I'm
Woman King.
sorry.
No, it's okay. I'll take it. We need to go to the cinema or something and
Yeah,
go
we
and see some
do.
films. But I love films. I'm a movie. I like watching movies. And The Woman King's another amazing example of that because I think that was one of the first times that and the Woman King wasn't even mainstream Hollywood like that, but it was
Mm-hmm.
mainstream enough to be
Yeah.
known about, right? That was
Mm-hmm.
one of the first times that a historical narrative was honored that came from African people. A true,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, talking about like a true historical narrative. I mean, um, it was stylized and some things were changed for creative effects and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the first times I had ever seen, um, on that scale,
Mm.
An African narrative come to life in that way, and
Yeah.
it was palpable the way that it changed people's perception of what
Mm.
of even and I say African, I don't like that phrase using African or everything's African with those
Mm.
that big broad stroke, but truly I think that's one of the first times that as an entire um people,
Yeah.
a tiny piece of um the narratives that go on was honored and it changed people's perception of Africa as a whole in certain ways because they're
Mm.
like, oh wow, the woman king, women warriors, this is really cool. I want to learn
Mm.
more.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's cool that you wrote your book as a historical fiction because, like I said, it humanizes those characters.
Exactly. And with visual, like a lot of us are visual people. So when you see something, even if it's fictionalized, just seeing it is a
Hmm.
whole different experience. And yeah, it makes you curious. You want to know more. And yeah, so that's a really important point that you brought up about the Women
Yeah.
King and the power of film, essentially.
Mm. But I think, like you're saying as well, I think books have the same type of power um,
Definitely.
and to tell that story. What was it like for you to write those two perspectives? Because yes, it's I mean, I can imagine, you can tell me more about this. I can imagine writing the perspective of somebody living in Asaba at the time is tough. But
Yeah.
also trying to write the perspective of somebody living in the UK in the 60s is not easy also.
No. Not at all. Yeah, I think writing both sides was very challenging, but writing from the perspective of trauma being in Asaba was even more challenging just because I've never lived in Nigeria.
Hmm.
And then I've never even lived in the 60s in the middle of
Hmm.
a war. So I definitely had to speak to a lot of people who live in Nigeria currently. I watched a lot of documentary to try and get some kind of idea of how it would have been at the time. And then I also do read a lot of historical fiction, even Chimamanda's Half of a Yellow Sun. I did draw some inspiration from that and the way
Mm.
it was written. And then I had to rely on my imagination a lot because that was what I could really go off. And I had to, at times, I was really questioning, like, can I really write this? But I think The most important thing for me was knowing the facts, the historical facts of what went on at the time. And then in terms of like how it actually played out, I realized that it's never going to be perfect, essentially. And I'm gonna have to do what I feel, and
Yeah.
using whilst equipping myself with those historical facts, because the main thing for me was portraying the history, and the way I write about it is kind of like down for interpretation. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, in terms of Onome's was a lot easier to write just because she was now living in London, and obviously I've spent a lot of my life in London. And she was confronting a lot of things that we still confront today. You
Mm-hmm.
know, reading false narratives about Africa, trying to assimilate in a place that is oftentimes unwelcoming, and still trying to retain your identity, but at the same time trying to fit in. That's the kind of thing that she
Yeah.
had going on. And so I could definitely relate to her as a character a lot more. And so that flowed a lot easier during the writing process. But yeah, it was a challenge. It was definitely challenging. There were times I just had to trust my gut, trust my
Yeah.
instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I also had a few friends helping me read the manuscript and hearing their
Mm-hmm.
thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was a challenge, but I managed to pull it
Yes, you
off in the
did.
end.
Yes, you did. Yeah, I mean, I find that, and I'm not a writer. Maybe one day I'll write a book, but I think that concept is so interesting to me, is like relating to a character that you've written and then not relating to a character that you have written. Because to me,
Mm.
I'm like, they both came from my brain. I mean, my temptation, no, no, not to sound like patronizing or anything, but like my temptation would be to write a character that I understood.
Hmm.
So to write one that you're like, I don't really relate to you is interesting.
Yeah,
You published this book in March, right?
yeah, correct.
So what's the story there? Now, for those listening, I already know the story. Buckle in, this is a good story. But what's the story of you? What's the point story of publishing the book, Claudia?
But yeah, it was a very like turbulent publishing process. I don't think I speak about it a lot, but I will tell you because, and everyone listening, because I think it's still an important part of how the book came to be. Yeah, I finished writing the book. I left it to the side for a while just to let it settle in, and then I revisited it again, did some editing, and when I was finally ready to send it out, because initially I wanted to publish it traditionally, I ended up self-publishing, which we'll get into, but yeah, that was the plan, and so I sent the manuscript in to an independent publisher in London. It was quite a small publisher, but they had published a lot of books, and yeah, I just wanted to kind of see what happens from there. And yeah, 3 months later, after I'd submitted, I got a response from them, and they were thrilled. They loved the book, the whole narrative. They wanted to work with me, which was very, very exciting at the time. And they assigned me an editor. I started working with the editor. The editing process was, even harder than the writing process because
Mm.
now you're really trying to perfect your work and make everything grammatically correct, think about audience appeal. But when I was writing, I was just kind of, letting the creative juices flow. Or,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so it was good. I was working with the editor. I was working with her for about a few months before the book deal came through. And so yeah, I received a book deal from this publisher, and that was when I was like, oh, this is actually
It's
becoming
amazing.
something.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
this is gonna be published, because obviously when I was writing it, I obviously had the tiny intention of publishing, but I was just writing because I wanted to, and um, I was prepared to just see how it goes, and to actually see it on paper form that, oh, it's going to be published. It was a lot to take in, but at the time I didn't have a literary agent, which is someone who deals with all the legal aspects of publishing, because the deal came in quite quick. and I hadn't started looking for a literary agent at that stage. And so essentially, it was left to me to do all the legal issues and negotiations and things like that. And me being the young student that I am, like, I didn't have any experience with that. So I did consult some professional help. Um, yeah, I sent the contract to the Society of Authors, which is a really good place to get some advice on that. I also sought some legal advice, and the same, I kind of received the same response from everywhere I turned to, that the contract wasn't in my favor. And when I say this, I mean that there were a lot of clauses in that contract that just weren't, I wasn't prepared to sign it. I think every author is different, and there are some things that an author might overlook. But I think the type of things within the contract, I just wasn't prepared to sign it at all. It was definitely to benefit the publisher
Yeah,
themselves, and
as opposed to you.
I
Yeah.
think, yeah, and I think being a debut author as well, being so young, being a black author as well, like you can very easily encounter like deals like this that are just not favorable at all. And then there's also that temptation of, oh, but in the end I will get published. But I'm glad I stood firm in my beliefs, and that if this is not something that looks healthy to me, or that looks like a two-way kind of relationship, then and something that just I'm not prepared to sign, then I'm just not gonna do it. And yeah, so
Yeah, facts.
I did try and negotiate, but obviously lacking that literary agent, that was definitely telling, because I think me negotiation was almost like a shock to the publisher. And they were very hostile in communications from that point on, when I was kind of outlining the clauses that I wasn't comfortable signing. And yeah, so it eventually ended in me not signing the contract, and the publisher were very firm. They were like, it's either this or nothing. Like, this is all we're comfortable offering you. And so
Yeah.
I had to make the tough decision of just, yeah, walking away, essentially, because I knew that my book was worth more than that. And yeah, and to me, like, I don't know, like, the book was just so important to me that I wouldn't like go to such lengths to try and publish it if it didn't make sense logistically. And if, yeah, some of the rights I believe I should have as an author weren't being granted. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I walked away from that. And from that moment on, I had the choice of either consulting more publishing companies, looking for a literary agent, or self-publishing. And I think yeah, self-publishing was looking like a good option for me at the time, because um, I'd seen firsthand like the almost the toxicity of the publishing industry, and I wasn't prepared, because this book meant so much to me. Had it been another book where history wasn't involved, and like maybe it was a romance or a crime novel,
Yeah.
maybe I'd have acted differently. But I think it was very personal, and it was also so important, and so I wasn't prepared to do that. So I looked towards self-publishing. I'd actually done a lot of research on it before even looking for publishers. So yeah, I did more research on it, and I realized, oh, this actually is a path that I do want to take.
Yeah.
So yeah, the good thing about self-publishing is it granted me a lot of creative autonomy. I then got to pick who was my editor, who was my cover designer, and yeah, it was. I
That's
still worked with
incredible.
the same editor that I had at the publishing company, which is quite interesting, because even though it didn't end on the best terms, it was nothing to do with the editor
Yeah.
herself, but
Yeah.
more to do with kind of the company and what they wanted
The
from.
legal stuff and the contracts and things like
Yeah,
that.
and she was still very passionate about the book. She wanted to continue working. I wanted to continue working with her as well, because we had come quite far, and yeah, we had definitely created a bond at that point. And so
Mm.
yeah,
Can I just start off by saying, and I'm not just saying this because we're recording a podcast or anything, that, like, can I just commend you so highly for doing that? Like, seriously, because in our community, these opportunities are few and far between for people.
Right.
And for you to be able to look at the deal that the publisher had given you and say, this does not serve me, the book, my vision, I cannot give you my dream like that for you to dismantle it for profit or whatever they wanted to do. I don't know, but
Mm,
like, can I seriously commend you for that? Because that is not an
thank
easy choice
you.
to make. Like for real. Do you listen to this? We'll try one more reference. Do you listen to Lil Sims?
Yes.
Yes, we got
Lil Sims.
one.
Me and Lil Sims, like she was on my top five last year,
Mm-hmm.
Spotify, and like she's
As she
probably gonna be
should.
there again.
Yeah.
She's independent, right? Is that where
Yeah.
you were heading with this?
Yeah. One of her lines is like, she has a song where she says, you know, hey, what's the lyric? She says,
Which song is
um,
it from?
there's one in the song Angel. God sent me, you
Oh.
was an angel. An angel. She was like, uh, there's another
Yeah,
song where
she's
she said
amazing.
you'll be rushing life decisions over a three-course meal. Next thing you know, you're doing three tours. Like a lot of
Mm,
times, these big companies, whether it's music or writing or whatever, um, will pressure you. She said it. Oh, I remember the lyric. She said, "If the contract is more than 3 pages, it's a bad sign." And
mm,
she's kind of saying like a lot of times these companies, and this is why it's so hard, like you alluded to, being a young black person in these
mm,
spaces is hard because they will give you these
mm,
these opportunities, these deals, and they look amazing on the surface. When you
yeah.
interrogate them though, you're being exploited, and they
Mm,
they don't want you to know that. They kind of are like,
exactly.
you should be grateful that you have this
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah, that was definitely the vibe I was getting when I was even communicating with the publisher. It was almost like we're doing so much, granting you this opportunity that you should be grateful. And yeah, that definitely, I kept that in mind when I was navigating that whole situation.
Yeah. And the thing is, unfortunately, they don't do that with other communities.
Mm,
You know what I'm saying? That kind of
definitely.
thing of like, you should be grateful. You should be great. Don't
Yeah.
you, you're one in a million. You should be grateful. We're doing this. And I'm
Mm,
like, brother, I mean, for those of you who are listening and you know Michaela Cole as well, she's a writer, actress, all around
mm,
amazing human. She went through something similar with her show Chewing Gum.
mm,
When she wrote Chewing Gum, she pitched it to Channel 4. They liked it and they wanted to make so many changes. And I think for the
mm,
first season, she was like, I can't allow you to do that. But in the second season, I'm not really sure the story is there, but it's something that happens consistently
mm,
to Black people and specifically to um, young Black women specifically, but young Black people generally. Um,
yeah, and I think they're capitalizing off the fact that these opportunities are so scarce in our community. So they think because of that reality, we're quick to jump to any kind of opportunity, even if there's hidden exploitative measures behind it.
mhm,
But I'm glad that we're definitely waking up and seeing that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And
mhm,
um, yeah, and I'm glad that something like self-publishing exists because traditional publishing isn't for every single story, I would say.
mhm.
And just having that opportunity available definitely helps in these situations because yeah, there are certain things that I just can't I can't sign, like I can't do it. Um,
Yeah. Which big ups to you, like I said, really big ups to you.
thank you.
Just to really, we've got a few minutes before we finish, and I wanted to kind of end talking about something which you touch on in your book, and also is probably something you in your personal life will have a good grasp of, is the diaspora identity, the diasporan
Mm,
identity. What does that mean to you? I mean, I know you said you grew up in London, then you were in Sweden, and then you were in Edinburgh, and then you wrote a book about a character who was living in the diaspora. Like, what does that identity like mean to you? How do you connect to that?
yeah, yeah, to me it just means, being in a place where you're from, but you're not really from. Like you have an identity, that you're distant from it.
Mm,
Um, but you're in a space where you've developed a sense of identity, but you still have that identity. Essentially, I'm waffling a lot, but it's just
It's complex. It's okay to
like for
waffle. It's
me, yeah,
complex.
it's so complex. And um yeah, being a Nigerian, like Nigeria is home to me, but at the same time, because I've never lived there, and because there's so many Nigerians around the world, we've almost developed a secondary identity within the spaces that we're in, and especially in London as well. I think London is such a hub, epicenter
Hmm.
for a lot of Africans, Caribbeans. We've been there for a while now, and so if we compare it to Scotland, at least, the culture is very much entrenched
Yeah.
within London. So um, yeah, even our words as well. You can find it in London slang, like nyash,
Hmm.
those
Everybody knows
type
that
of
one.
words. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, just being part of the diaspora, it's a nice feeling. But then sometimes you're also like, oh, like sometimes I wish I had the experience of at least living in Nigeria for a year, like just knowing
Mm-hmm.
how it is, and just yeah, it's complex.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, the languages, because as part of the diaspora, there's ways that you can still kind of connect to back home. Language is definitely one of those ways, and it's one of the ways that I can't
Hmm.
particularly relate to my country, because I'm from two different tribes, Urhobo and Yoruba, and so my parents speak two different languages, and yeah, so I was never really taught my native tongue,
Yeah.
and yeah, but I feel like as part of the diaspora, knowing your native language is a really good way to connect.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people can relate to that experience as well, not being able to speak their native language. I
mhm,
think it's a very uh, tender, painful point for a lot of people,
mhm,
and can be very frustrating. But I think it is also very common. Um,
mhm,
but like we said before, these things are complex. Identity is complex, and with
mhm,
that, the way that we even engage with identity is complex. Like I don't think that, um, um, yeah, I don't think that because we don't speak or you don't speak your native languages, that doesn't take away from your Nigerianness. You get
mhm.
what I'm saying? No, nobody can take that away from you, but it is a frustrating thing to navigate. You're absolutely right. So we're pretty much coming to a close. I mean, this has been a jam-packed conversation,
It
um,
has.
full of a lot of gems and a lot of
Mm,
man, I wish we could talk for 2 more hours. I mean,
yeah,
we've already spoken at length, Claudia, you and I, about your book, your experience, your story. But there's just so much that I'm just like, oh, I wish we could just delve into this. But maybe we'll come back and do something else, and we can work on
yeah.
and exploring this a little bit as well. Before we finish, I mean, I like to ask this question to people, especially for somebody like you that has done this amazing thing, written this book. If you could speak to little Claudia from 10 years ago, um
Mm.
what would you tell her?
Um, yeah, little Claudia, I would tell her to just keep chasing your dreams. Because as I mentioned, I was always someone who liked to read, liked to write. But I think I never knew this would like become a reality. I
Hmm.
was also someone who was very shy, like extremely shy. I wouldn't do what I'm doing now, like speak on podcasts, or I've even spoken at events in front of huge crowds. Like I would have never
Hmm.
thought I'd have the ability to do that. So I think just yeah, being confident in my abilities. Um, do continue, do you woo like do you boo because yeah, when you're young, sometimes you lack that inspiration, especially me being a black young girl. I think black young girls growing up now, they're a lot better off in terms of inspiration. Like there's so many people up and coming
Yeah.
artists, writers that you can look towards. And not that there weren't any back then, but I think it was a lot less. Like I didn't really see that growing up. And so to yeah, to just keep being inspired and keep going at what you're doing and being confident in my abilities. Because if I knew back then, like what I'd be doing now, I'd be so happy. But obviously,
Yeah.
I didn't have that the benefit of hindsight. But
But yeah,
yeah,
it's
just amazing.
I think I always say my goal in life, I always say is to make two people proud, and that is me at 9 years old and me at 90 years old. Those are the two people I'm trying to do right by, and I think you've done a really good job by little Claudia, for real. And
Yeah,
I really mean that, especially in the way that you navigated the publishing of your book, like, and holding to your autonomy and holding that story, because really and truly, this story is so important. It's so special. And to hold that the way that you did, like I said, is amazing. Um,
thank you. Oh,
yeah. This has been a sick conversation, for real. This has been really
yeah,
sick.
I've
Do you have
really
anything
enjoyed
you?
it.
Yeah, I'm glad, man. I'm glad. Do you have anything you want to, any wisdom you want to disperse onto the people before we close today?
Yeah, I just say, it's so cliche, but keep going after what you want and keep doing what you love, even if it isn't the primary thing you're doing, because some of us maybe studying degrees that we're not passionate about, but we're still doing it. I definitely say I am studying a degree that I'm passionate about, but I know a lot of people who aren't, and I think that shouldn't stop you from doing something that you love, even if it's on the side. I think you should always take time out of your day or your week to really do what you love and go after what you want. And it's easier said than done, but I think yeah, even you with the Diaspora Project and um, like you're on play. I don't know if you told people who are listening right now, but you're on placement, and yet here you are, recording this episode with me, and you're just such a good host as well. Like I felt very comfortable, and like we're bouncing off each other, and you study a degree that's so different
Hmm.
in a way, and yeah, so things like that, seeing things like that definitely inspire me. Seeing people who are doing a lot of different things, doing what makes them happy, doing what they're passionate about, and that's what I would say to anyone listening. Don't know if
I
that's
love it.
helpful, but I hope it is.
No, it is, because I was saying to my mom a couple months ago, like, it's only when I really became an adult, like I came to uni in the last couple of years, that I realized that, when people tell you that the world is your oyster, like
Mm,
that's true. Like, don't let
it's true.
anyone tell you that it's not the truth. That is the truth. You can do anything you want to do, put your mind to it. Um, and yeah, go after your goals, go after your dreams. I love it. I mean, that's really it in a nutshell, and that's exactly
Yeah.
what you do. And I wish you all the best
Also,
with you. Oh, tell
I
me.
really want to add another thing. If there's any like writers listening to this, please let's connect because I'm
Facts,
down
facts,
to
facts, facts. Yeah.
making connections. I'm down to speaking to people about their journeys, their experiences, and just the writing scene generally. So I'm sure my Instagram will probably be in the bio somewhere.
Absolutely. All of your
Um,
details.
at,
We're gonna link Claudia's stuff
yeah,
in the details and the link to where can people buy your book and things like that. We will
yeah,
link that in the details in the show notes, because y'all need to read
yeah.
it.
Sure. So yeah, so never feel shy to reach out to me because I know I've done a lot of reaching out to people as well, and that's really helped me gain clarity on the industry I'm stepping into, or just getting advice. And so yeah, I'm down to like make connections, make writer friends. So guys, reach out please, and thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love it. Claudia, it has been really, really great to speak to you this afternoon. Really, really
It's been
good.
amazing speaking to you. Thank you as well.
And
Enjoyed the
we
conversation.
and thank you all for listening as well. And like we said, if you want to hear more about what Claudia is up to, where you can get her book, where you can read all about her, that will be linked in the show notes and below. And thank you very much for listening to this episode, and we will see you on the next one. Peace. Hey, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Diaspora Project podcast. We hope you enjoyed this conversation and you'll stick around for the next one. If you'd like to keep up to date with what we're doing, you can find us on our website, www.thediasporaproject.co.uk, or you can find us on our social media pages. On Instagram, we are at thediaspora.project. TikTok, we are at The Diaspora Project. And on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, we are The Diaspora Project. Thank you again, and we will see you next time.